Hey everyone, and welcome to the Psyched to Practice podcast, your one stop for practical and useful clinical information, masterful insights from experts in the field, and a guide to daily living. I'm your host, Paul Wagner, and joining me is
Ray Christner.
And we have an interesting conversation today. It's going to be another bonus episode, and we're kind of diving into this idea of rivalries and really the role that they play, the good, the bad, the benefits, all of it.
Yeah, and I think that it's this, this came up for me because we see it everywhere, right? Whether it's sports or politics or even businesses competing against each other. And what really got me thinking about this topic and into some more detail. So I'm a basketball fan. Really love women's basketball, WNBA. And one of the rivalries that I've kind of followed even from college on is Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese. And what's really kind of got me on the topic with that, though, is that people almost feel like they have to hate the rival. So if they love Caitlin Clark, what you see on social media and what you see even in the media itself is this villainization of Angel Reese, or vice versa. It kind of goes both ways, maybe more so in that Angel Reese is the villain. But I've been kind of fascinated on kind of why that happens and like what's the kind of psychology behind it. And then how can we use kind of that idea even to help drive us in therapy? So, I use this stuff with patients all the time. Thought it could be an interesting kind of topic.
And so often I tend to lean into, especially with individuals with neurodivergency, that this idea of finding common motivators or things we can lean back into. And competition is one that almost always comes up. And even for those individuals who don't view themselves as competitive, they're like, I don't care. Finding something that they can create, it is this rivalry. And, when we think of the term rival, like I tend to associate like, oh, there's an enemy, or like there's someone who's like, I need to beat them. I need to win. And it does such a great job of inspiring and generating motivation for us. And I think that can be a really good thing, but it does have its downsides, and it makes it hard for us to really kind of view the opposing side in any sort of kind of non-biased or non-judgmental way. And so the benefits are there. We just also need to make sure we're aware of like, what's the consequence, what's the cost of a rivalry? Because I know I'm not as into the basketball, but certainly a fan of Penn State, and been to many a game, and going up against Ohio State in particular, I'd say is one. Michigan, past year, maybe not so much, and the rivalry is there, and it can get nasty. Like it can get like people are really being crass and crude and really saying some hateful things. And so we have to be cautious with rivalry.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that it's being cautious and realizing, I think it's too easy to get into the negative part of it. And I think maybe let's talk about some of the, I think, kind of underlying pieces. It's, as I've kind of thought through this, it's like, the first piece kind of thinking about how we all create some social identity around rivalries, around sports teams or athletes. I grew up a Steeler fan. I am still a Steeler fan. And it's really interesting. It is, you want to hate Baltimore, you want to hate the Browns or whoever it might be. And, again, it's like, sometimes it can get ugly. We see it all the time, right?
Yeah.
People getting in fights at sporting events, which is supposed to be something that's really interesting. But, this idea of social identity theory, like we just start strongly identifying with the group, whether it's a team, whether it's a player. And a lot of times our own self-esteem gets tied to that. We were kind of talking prior, you kind of made a comment, well, I don't even play for Penn State, but I get it, I'm affected by their law.
And even when my wife will laugh because sometimes we're walking past, if I'm driving or we're walking past something that has a Ohio State logo, she'll be like, oh man, I feel really kind of sick and ill. And like, it's just like this, like really easy, and it's fun to fall into at times, but again, it's the us versus them. They are the them. And it's like, there's the us, like, we're the heroes. We are the protagonists, and so if we have a protagonist, we need to have then the antagonist, and naming a specific group as an antagonist. And it really helps to kind of align of like when we're coming in flashing, it's oil and water in a way. And it really inspires us to do our best and the good and the bad that comes out of it.
Yeah, it's the whole simplicity of the in group versus the out group,
Yeah.
right? It's that whole piece of it. So yeah, so I think that's one piece. The other piece that kind of I look at is, what takes that identity and goes, I guess maybe takes it further. And I think it's the idea of group polarization.
Yeah.
Which is the other kind of like underlying piece that again is good. We like to be around people who talk about things that we like to talk about or have shared beliefs. And so then we start seeing, fan culture. Again, what got me on this was, I follow basketball online. And the online forums and the media threads that come around rivalries, it intensifies the us against them mentality. So I think that polarization piece is where it then can be positive, but I think it also gets dangerous.
Yeah. And I think that the dangerous piece of it is when, well, there's a few different avenues. I think one of the dangerous avenues is when it becomes hateful,
Right.
and really when if it inspires any sort of violence, or we're like really kind of taking it too far. So going back to your comment of the fist fights that break out at sporting events, it's entertainment. We're there to enjoy the experience of watching some, play. And it's wonderful that we're getting emotionally charged, but we have to be mindful of where that's coming from, because if we're walking away with charges, then that's not the type of emotionally charged that we want coming out of that sporting event.
Right.
And so making sure that we're kind of keeping in check what's the emotions that it evokes, because it is this negativity, but we want to keep it a functional or a growth oriented negativity.
Yeah.
Because if we start leaning into like hatred or defaming or really, again, just more crass language, one, we lose the benefit of the rivalry, I think. And the other is like it really can create this, that's a commonly used term, but like this kind of toxic environment.
Sure.
Where it's really hard to separate ourselves from, because that polarized language can really evoke this disgusted response with the other side.
Yeah. And I oftentimes talk with people and I even find myself making sure that like, I do love to hate rivals. I don't want to say that I don't. Like, there's part of me that I think it's motivating and it's fun and it makes me cheer more intensely. But hating them because they're, the team against mine is one thing. But I think we can still reframe it and respect the rival. And I think the respect's, I think, such a key word in this idea. And I'm going to go back to the Caitlin Clark, Angel Reese thing. I am a huge Caitlin Clark fan, have been since college. She's brilliant. I think she's done great things. I also think Angel Reese is just an exceptional player. I respect her skill. I respect the fact that she is such a good athlete as well. And I have to keep that at the forefront of the rivalry. So I can be upset that she made a basket. I can be upset when she wins. Thank goodness she hasn't yet this year, but it's been a different thing with those teams this year. At the end of the day, I don't have to hate the fact that she does win and she is good. And I think that's the respect piece that we just kind of have to keep in play. Because if we pay attention to the respect, we might have some negativity, but we're not going to harbor this kind of anger toward the rivals.
And you're going to make me say it on recording. Ohio State is a great school and they're a phenomenal football team. And when Penn State is out, then I want Big Ten to do well. So I will begrudgingly hope Ohio State will win, just to, within the conference. There is a level of respect and recognition. And I think when we don't have the recognition, or when we try to invalidate or undercut the recognition of what makes them a rival, that's another dangerous piece, because then without respect, we can really get to some of that more like vitriolic language there.
That's right. Yeah. And it's, and I think, so I think there's probably people going like, why would we respect rivals? And I think that's where the twist comes in. I think, talking a bit about the positive aspects of rivalries and why they're so important, and I made the comment, Batman would have been a really terrible hero if there was no Joker or there was no Penguin or whatever rival we want to have. Not a real interesting show. It's, you got to have that in there. And I think that we got to just realize how much rivalries are such great motivators. And, we know that, like, there's been great work in sports psychology, where, when a player's or a team's playing against a rivalry, they play 30% more intensely. That's a huge number. So think if we apply that in life. Like, what if we're a student and we have a rival that we want to do better? Could we really perform that much better by giving us some competition?
And in a lot of it, if someone is elevated to the status of rival, they get there for a reason. And, we have to recognize that. Like, if everyone's a rival, then one, that sounds awful. We're walking around like really kind of having a miserable experience there. But there's something about the the them, if we're thinking about that in group, out group, that's why we view them as a rival, because they have similar qualities or a similar ability or a similar capability, or maybe they're even better. However, I think on Penn State, but when you're talking about that 30% better, Beaver Stadium's decibel reading, I think, has never been higher than when whiteout game against Ohio State,
right?
When they can't hear their own play calls and they miss the count and force of like, those are like, that's what a rivalry inspires. And it's, that's the group think along with the rivalry that comes along with it, is it evokes a strong reaction and emotion. And, that's not happening in every game. It could, we've demonstrated it could, but it's not for that specific reason. So it can really create that sense of buy-in. And when we're exerting just that much more force, and in some ways, because it feels like you have to lay it all out in the field, so to speak, because, you want to walk away the victor. And that's a significant and important piece. So with students motivating with, and I would even say with friends, like if, hey, if you're trying to develop a skill, I think I mentioned previously, I enjoy snowboarding. Like one of my friends is a phenomenal snowboarder. I try to do better than him.
Yeah.
And if I do better than him, I let him know it. And like, it's a fun banter back and forth. Like, he's my friend. I love him to death. But in that moment, like if he and I are snowboarding and like, I see him doing something, I'm like, all right, I got to do a little better.
Yeah.
It's a push.
Yeah. I'll never forget. I think it was an undergrad, and one of my professors made a comment that I've heard other times as well, but was like, if you ever find yourself in a room and you're the smartest person in the room, you're never going to grow. Like, you need that other person to elevate. And, kind of going back to this whole idea of sports psychology, there's a sports psychology researcher. His name's Paul McCarthy, not McCartney, McCarthy. I always write it wrong, but he talks about competitive push and this idea that when we have a competitive push, we have greater focus, we have greater persistence, and we put forth greater effort. Those are three really important things, and when we don't have that, it's not that we won't do well, but we may not do as well. So essentially that rivalry raises the bar, whether it's snowboarding, whether it's academics, whether it's football, basketball, that is such an important part to why we play better. I mean, we've all seen it, whether it's a sports game or whatever, when people are playing against that rival, it just seems like their game's just a bit on. It's a bit more on.
And I'm curious your take on this, right? Like, also makes me think when you're labeling the different areas of use, makes me think about relationships and really kind of where the honeymoon period comes within a relationship. And I don't necessarily know that we think about it as we have a rivalry of showing compassion and showing, care for one another. But there's that specific focus, and, it's important to not try to outdo each other. But there's an element of, really trying to think like, how do I give the perfect Christmas gift? Or how do I give, show the perfect anniversary, write the perfect anniversary card? It's that push for just that additional effort versus just signing a card or just, getting a gift card. There's a different level of effort that's being put forth.
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting way to look at it, right? Like, I mean, you don't think about that, but I mean, I think initially in relationships, I think both parties do try to step up their game a bit, right? And then we hit a comfort zone, and I mean, it's interesting. I guess we probably don't want to ever label it a rivalry or a competition. Like maybe that doesn't. But I don't know. Maybe we should. Like, maybe I guess, like, what's the harm in that? What's the harm in kind of going, listen, I love you so much, and I'm going to step up my game, and then by doing that, you're going to step up your game, and makes us be more creative. Makes us, I mean, all of those things. That can be healthy. I think it. I mean, I think somebody can take it to some extreme. For the most part, I think it's an interesting way to look at it. I mean, I think this idea of rivalry we can put in play in a whole bunch of different ways. I mean, even the business world, the idea of, McDonald's was better because of Burger King. And, There's a reason why they're positioned next to each other in most towns. Like, you see one, the other one's pretty close. But as companies, they became more innovative because of each other. Coke and Pepsi did the same thing. Like, I mean, there's so many things in the business world with, in some ways, they created those rivalries to just come up with something different. Taco Bell's become a rival to all of them because they're the most innovative. They just throw stuff at the wall and to see what happens. But you know what? When it sticks, somebody else tries to copy it.
The
I think it's
cheese that makes it
interesting.
stick.
Jeez, that's right. But I think it's interesting. Like this idea is when it's healthy, it is such a great healthy experience for us to have. And then when it goes wrong, that's when we have problems. And I think for some of it, I mean, I don't know. I think that the idea of media and social media and all the content we digest, it's created more intensity in rivalries. Yeah, I mean, we've known them for all of our lives, right? We've seen them through sports and everything. But now the hate that comes from rivalries that's so easy to do under an anonymous post online can make it ugly.
Yeah. And I think that's the danger of rivalry. It's like it provides such a great avenue of improvement, but it is also this we can fuel the rivalry with hatred in the same way we can with competition. And when we no longer are pouring in competition, man, is hatred easy. And we need both for it to be effective. And probably more competition than hatred. But if it's just competition with no hatred, it's not a rivalry.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, there's got to be a little bit of that, but I think there's a way to balance it somewhat too. I mean, I think it's, it's interesting. Again, I keep going back to the Caitlin Clark Angel Reese thing. One of the most interesting scenarios with them was back in college when they played in college. There was a situation where Caitlin Clark did a celebratory gesture where it was "You don't see me," like put the hand in front of your face. Symbol. And when she did it, people were like, "Oh, she's bold, she's intense, she's all these things." And not far after that, Angel Reese did it I think it was in the final four games. Like it was during March Madness. So it was at that time, and she did the same thing back. And then the media was like, "That's unsportsmanlike," and it was all these things. And so there's been studies like, I think Rice University did a whole study on perception around that and how when we have rivalries, we can have the same behavior that we perceive differently based on that. And I bring that example because I think part of how we create a better balance with this and a healthy rivalry is, again, it comes back to that respect. If one person does it and we go, "Wow, this was wonderful," and the rival does it and we go, "Oh, they're the evilest person in the world," we got to check ourselves a bit. Like we got to step back and go, "Wait a second. Like this is, a cheap shot's a cheap shot." And we have to, it's hard to do when we're emotionally invested in teams. But again, now we kind of go with social media. When that happens, we see these blasts and teardowns of people versus going, when I saw both of them do it, I loved it. I thought it was awesome that they both were kind of going at each other a little bit with those gestures. Again, it made them both step up and play better, which I think is good.
And letting it evoke the right emotion in the right amount. Because if it evokes, it's supposed to evoke anger and almost like disrespect, a respectful disrespect, but if we're stepping over into hatred, then it's, or we're tearing someone down. And truly, I think politics plays a lot into that as well. And when we're talking about holding two different, there's different levels of accountability. And it is true on both sides where comments about, "Oh, I can't believe this is happening." And maybe it can just be even the next day and the same very similar scenario happens. And it's like, "Oh, well, you shouldn't be commenting on that." And again, creating this sense of it's almost becomes like they can do no wrong. And that's a dangerous space. So when we're talking about rivals, we should also talk about over idolizing certain things and certain behaviors. And so, if someone can do no wrong, that's a dangerous position. And it's a dangerous way that we can view them. And so we need to have keeping, if Penn State makes a cheap shot, I don't like it, but the ref's going to see it, the ref's going to call it. And when, if the rival team makes it, going to be a little bit more relieved when the ref makes that call, but it's how we keep order and it's how we really can play things and be effective versus it just being kind of devolving into nothing but cheap shots. And, again, this almost kind of circular rhetoric that doesn't really progress or create any positive competition or change. It's just stagnation at that point.
Yeah. You mean the refs aren't always wrong when it's against your team?
I mean, it feels that way, but realistically and logically, I know emotionally.
I always love that. I always love when people are like, "Oh, the refs are terrible." Sometimes they are. Like that happens, but yeah, it shows that bias. But I want to jump back to the politics thing, and just because I think politics is a great example of how rivalries have gone wrong and been unproductive. So, we talked earlier about it raises the bar, it makes us better. It's interesting. I think in politics now, what we see is the rivalries have made both parties quite stagnant. We're in a pretty progressive area of knowledge that we can really do a whole lot of great things. There's not been a lot that's happened that's made great progress in politics. And part of that is now the rivalries have been so hateful that we just accept the fact that people are going to be on our side because of one party or the other. And we don't have to up our game. I love reading political books. And we look back in history, both parties were better because of the other. And it was always about, hey, we have to up our game to be better, to make more changes, to do more things. And now it doesn't feel like that happens. And so I think when rivalries get so ugly, that's that stagnation process. That really is. It's where it's at. And I think we have to, we never want to see that with our sports teams. And we don't want to see that in a lot of other areas, but it shows where it can really go wrong. But I think if we think back to what we've said already, what promotes healthy rivalry? That mutual respect, I think, it's got to be the key. And when we start there, the rest kind of falls in place. So I want to wrap it up with talking a little bit about the therapeutic.
Yeah.
And kind of like, so, since, that's kind of what we do. How do we kind of take this idea of rivalry and tie it into therapy? And I kind of mentioned in the beginning, I use this all the time. And one of the ways that I look at it is really trying to normalize the ambivalence between rivals. So working with people to talk about, like, when they feel kind of hostile towards somebody, normalizing the fact that they can also respect that person. I just had somebody I was talking to just within the last few weeks who was on he hates Tom Brady. I'm like, hates him. I said, okay, like, he's not, like, as a Steeler fan, he's really not been my favorite person either. But can we respect Tom Brady? Can we kind of have an identification of, yes, we root for this team, but this other person's really fantastic, and recognizing that. So really trying to talk people through ambivalence. And I think, again, using these as an example, it also helps us even with other relationships in our life. We all have ambivalence, that we can respect somebody but not like them as well.
Yeah.
And I think that's one application.
And I think where I oftentimes have a conversation with this is co-parenting, and when individuals are engaging in co-parenting, and especially when, maybe not when it's the nastiest, but when it's not great co-parenting that's going on, it's trying to kind of one up, and it's, how do we have a mutual respect? Because winning the game is like, you're supporting your child, and you want to support your child, whether they're, your co-parent or in your home. And so how do you play by the rules and do it well, like step up as a co-parent versus really kind of devolving into some of like the nasty hatred. And like, oftentimes it's easy to fall into that. It's easy to vilify, but even if we are vilifying, how do we vilify with respect? And how do we use it as a motivating competition to step our game up rather than to just sit back and, say nasty, hateful things?
I like that. And one of the other ways I like using it is really as a way to challenge kind of dichotomous or polarized thinking as well. Really, again, it's a great way to give examples. And again, I'll go back to Angel Reese and Caitlin Clark. It's a great example to illustrate kind of that nuance, that we actually have two truths that exist at the same time. Both of them are great and both of them are flawed. And it's not black or white. It's not this dichotomy of one's good, one's bad. There are many things about both of them that coexist. There are times, as much as I think Caitlin Clark's a brilliant basketball player, there are some things she does that are flawed that I don't like. She complains a whole lot on the basketball court. Drives me crazy, but she's also great. And there are things that Angel Reese does that I think are great, and there are things that I don't think are. And so I think, again, using this as a way to talk to people about the idea of shades of gray that happen in our thinking, I think is a great way to use it.
And, one, I think it's probably the most common use for me, but it's really kind of emphasizing competition. And I think I started off with saying how a lot of times individuals neurodivergency, competition is a great motivator, and we can really draw on that pretty consistently. Whether if it's trying to develop a skill, it's find someone better than you. They don't even need to know that they're your rival, but you can make them your rival. And how do you go and do better? Whether that's academically, hey, go pick someone you think smarter than you, do better than them. Don't gloat. You don't have to do any of the showboating, but like, how do you look at what they're doing? How do you emulate and the rivalry that they have this skill, and how do we work to accomplish or achieve? Or in the gym, find someone who's just slightly, lifting slightly heavier than you, or who has a slightly faster mile time. Yeah, beat them. And again, like, they don't need to know that they're in this competition. It's a motivator, and it's a wonderful one. It's one that we can draw on in so many different scenarios.
Yeah, I agree. I think that is such an important piece, and we can do it in so many little ways. Like, it doesn't even have to be a long-term rivalry. Years ago, I don't quite run like I used to run, but early in my phase, I got this idea. I wanted to run a 5K, and I'm not built like a runner for anybody that's ever met me, but it was just a challenge. I was like, I'm going to do this. It was something I wanted to do for myself. And so the whole time I go through all the training, I get there the morning of the 5K, and I was like, okay, how I'm going to do this is I'm going to pick one person that they're going to be the person I'm going to be my person I'm going to challenge myself against. So I'm going to stay in pace with them. So I get there, and there's all these like 18 and 19-year-olds that are running that are all like completely physically fit. And then there was one guy who was older than I was, probably in his early 70s. And I'm like, that's my guy. That's who I'm going to pace myself against. About 5 minutes in the race, he blew me away. Like, he was so far ahead of me. So I ended up having to switch back to the 18 and 19-year-olds who I actually was in better shape than they were. So we can switch our rivalries midway through as well.
Make it functional and purposeful. Absolutely.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, I think that maybe the kind of end one I would kind of talk about is, I think these are really good ways, and it kind of hits with everything we've talked about. We can really talk about rivalries therapy-wise as a way of kind of forming a healthy identity. And whether it's for teens or athletes, our identity is not solely tied to being the best.
Yeah.
And I think that's where rivalries kind of, I think, get in the way. But really talking with people about how we can use it to emphasize the process of being better, collaborating to being better, and how respecting other people can challenge us to do more. Like, all of those things, even when they're rivals, we can use them to our benefit.
And in some, like, when that edge is lost, like when someone is no longer, like, that purpose behind it can really fall flat. Like, it's such a steep drop off when it no longer feels functional in that way. And I think I'm so happy you said that, because reaching, like, being the best or winning isn't the goal. It's improving and growing is the goal. And I think that's really this line that we need to keep when we're talking about rivalry or using it in the therapy session. It's, and I think defining that with clients, hey, it's about improving. And that is the goal of this rivalry. It's not about you beating them. It's about improving. If you happen to beat them, that's wonderful. But it's more so about, are you continuing to grow?
That's right.
If not, we're stagnating.
Well, and I think to add on that is, I've had many people who the idea of competition and having a rival was intimidating for that reason. And I oftentimes tell them to start with having a rivalry to their self yesterday, where it's like, what can you do today that's going to be a step in the right direction for whatever goal we have that's better than what you did yesterday? I'll keep going back to basketball because that's the sport on my mind. But, if you can make 10 out of 20 foul shots yesterday, then our goal is to get 11 today. That's it. Doesn't have to be a perfect 20, but we can have a self rivalry first. And then as we get secure, we can take that maybe to another level and have other people be a further challenge for us. We don't have to be afraid of that competition. Competition is healthy, right?
Yeah, it certainly is. And with that, we hope you have some takeaways, finding some different applications for this and really trying to make a way to really have this growth oriented version of rivalry and not the stagnant one. We'll be back in 2 weeks. Until then, be well, stay psyched.